Hello and welcome back to Vinyl Friday, where I go through my records in alphabetical order like a big nerd and talk about why I love them. Today is kind of an unusual choice, but it's in my collection and I do love it, so I'm gonna go into it. Before you go, no, I hate musicals, I'm not listening anymore. Actually, no, if you hate musicals and you don't want to listen, far be it from me to stop you. You do what you want and what you need to do to make sure that you're having the best day possible. I'm still going to be here talking about 80s musicals. When I was in my early adolescence, my father got a job as a sailmaker in Mexico. That is a person who makes sails for boats, sailmaker. So for a brief period, we lived in the loft above the sailmaking. It's not called a studio. I can't think of the word. So whatever, studio. The sailmaking studio. We lived there for a period of a few months. This loft had a chorus line, the movie, which I believe is adapted from a Broadway musical. They had it on VHS, so I watched this many times. It was basically very exciting to be taking a holiday from the boat because it meant that we had flushing toilets. By that I mean you didn't have to pump it yourself. And we had a television. Being able to watch movies was really special. This one I especially liked because it taught me a lot about the adult world. In this musical, I learned about the concept of virginity and the idea that losing it isn't necessarily an awesome time for everyone. I also learned about venereal disease, the magic of cosmetic enhancement. Oh, homosexuality. I think this musical was the first time that I was confronted with the idea of coming out as a concept and why that might be a problem, especially in 1985. So it was a very educational experience for me as a young adolescent. I have a real soft spot for this movie. I also have a deep love in my heart for cult and unusual musicals, especially at the very tail end of the popularity of musical in the zeitgeist. So obviously they were huge in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and then interest started to wane in the 60s. Maybe we can blame Elvis for that. And then by the time the 70s hit, I think there were great musicals that were coming out, but they didn't have anywhere near as much of the appeal as they did in the Gene Kelly era. I really love those weird musicals. Hair from 1979. I love this one. I like Fame. One of my all-time favorites is The Wiz. I just think that all of these musicals deserve so much more love and attention than they get. And I suppose part of what I like about them is that they don't really adhere to tradition as much as older musicals, so there are still elements of the form of musical theater, but they're often blended with more modern musical sensibilities. Modern as in of the time, not as in now. Oh, Rocky Horror Picture Show. I forgot. Rocky Horror Picture Show. That's another good one. With that said, we're listening to this album, and this is the track that I have chosen.
5, 6, 7, 8!
This track is called I Hope I Get It. Not much happens in this musical. It's mostly centered around getting to know the characters, who come from different ethnic and socioeconomic backgrounds. It's kind of a cross-section of American society in 1985, but also not because they're all dancers who are auditioning for a Broadway musical. So we've covered that I like musicals generally speaking. Here's why I like this song in particular from this musical. The first thing is that, as I touched on earlier a little bit, it blends musical theater traditions with some very 80s musical tropes. Here are some ways that it sounds like musical theater. Big horns, ensemble singing, so we've got everyone singing in unison, call and response, cannons, everyone singing all together, and there's a real emphasis on enunciation. I really need this job. I've got to get this job. Dramatic vibrato. I don't know, everything's hyper theatrical for obvious reasons. And the enunciation, I believe, is because the music tells a story. So it's important that you can hear what they're saying in the song. This whole musical is an audition. You don't really get to see the show in the end. The whole thing is just the audition process. And this song is just the initial culling of dancers right at the beginning of the audition. There are hundreds of dancers, and they're all dancing all through this sequence. By the end of the song, these ones are the only ones who are left. And then by the end of the movie, they choose their dancers from these dancers. So lyrically, it goes from God, I Hope I Get It, to God, I Really Blew It,
I really blew it.
How could I do it to myself?
to God, I Really Got It. It tells a story. Musical theater conventions. Superimposed over the top of that, or perhaps juxtaposed against it, blended with, mixed in, jumbled together, great big melting pot. 80s musical conventions. So here are some very 80s things that are featured in this song. Here we go. Okay, this part right here. Oh, do you hear those 80s drums? Those toms. These chords. That's very 80s. You hear that in a lot of 80s songs, especially like Kenny Loggins. I think it's because keyboards and synths and things really became quite popular in the 80s. You can change the chord on top while holding the bass note. That's much harder to do on guitar as opposed to piano. So you get lots of sequences like this. This chord. This chord. I'm still here. Those chords are all being held over this bass note. Don't tell anyone that I'm actually the piano correspondent. She's really just over there. Don't look behind the curtain. You end up with a lot of songs that have those sorts of chord structures in the 80s because keyboards lend themselves really well to that kind of thing, and because they sound great. That's one of them. It's also got the synth, which comes back in later and you can hear more clearly. Really wild vibrato at the end of it. I think Kenny Loggins uses a very similar tone in his 1982 song, No Looking Back. Editing Nancy will show you. Thank you. I think that's a very 80s synth sound. Shimmering synths. I love those. They sound celestial. The saxophone. This guitar tone. I've been looking into why so many 80s guitars sound like that. A very wide vibrato, pinch harmonic. What's a pinch harmonic, you ask? I'll ask my research correspondent. Just a moment.
A pinch harmonic, also known as squelch picking, pick harmonic, or squealy, is a guitar technique to achieve artificial harmonics in which the player's thumb or index finger on the picking hand slightly catches the string after it is picked, cancelling, silencing the fundamental frequency of the string and letting one of the overtones dominate. This results in a high-pitched sound which is particularly discernible on an electrically amplified guitar as a squeal.
Let me know if you have any other theories, because I'm curious about this. But I think Eddie Van Halen is the sort of nexus point of 80s guitar tropes. I can't really find anyone before Eddie Van Halen who popularized these sorts of tropes and techniques. Weird time signatures. I don't actually know what the time signature is, but it goes like... There are 6 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 half, as opposed to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think that's a weird time signature, so it's won my heart. And then the last thing is really interesting discordant chords. Here's a highlight reel of discordant chords in this song that I like. Actually, that last one, let's go into a bit more detail. Piano correspondent, would you break that down for us, please? This is one of the very coolest things about this song. You take this very interesting chord. It's like a D minor, but with this note and this note added. So it sounds like this. Then it goes down a semitone, so God, I hope I get it. I hope I get it. How many people does he need? That's kind of weird. Which I love. Back to you. Those are some things I really love about the song. While all of that is happening musically, because it's a soundtrack, this is the magical thing about soundtracks, I can see the scene happening in my head. Dance is a big component of this film. There's something about 80s dance that's just so extra. My sister is a dancer, so I asked her to summarize for me what it is about 80s dance that is so perfectly exemplified in this film, and she sent me like a 6-minute treatise. Here's an abridged version of what makes the dancing so special throughout this scene.
There's a lot of like looseness and flow through the body and through the joints specifically.
I should say, I don't know what she means for maybe a third of this voice message.
Specifically the knees and hips and shoulders and neck. I think there's like a lot of neck.
Those are all things that humans use to move, so I guess I'm following that part.
In between the moments of rhythmic gymnastics to get aerobics. big dramatic moves that use the entire body, lots of extension.
Extension.
If there's a big hit in the music, or a big beat, or a big stop, there's gonna be some pose, or a leap, or a high kick. It really follows the dramatic moments of the music. If you think of the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, they're always doing something on those kind of hits. And then the final point, it can be really sensual and sexual. I guess my other point of comparison is the one that has the lady from the L Word in it, where she's a welder. I can't remember the name of it. Flashdance, there you go.
The lady from the L Word.
Gyrating hips and touching the body and like sensual faces and hair whipping and that type of thing expresses a different type of sensuality than what you see in the 90s. 90s is much more explicit. So that would be how I characterize 80s Broadway / theater dancing. That and extremely high-cut leotards. What a good time.
Friends and gentlefolk, my sister. I forgot to mention, my sister's a professor, so she's always a good value person to hit up for certain special interest topics because she goes into professor mode, which I love. Love you, Anna. Love your work. Anyway, that's everything from me. I hope you had a great time. I had a great time. Thanks for hanging out with me. I hope that you have a splendid weekend. Bye!